Hello and welcome to this lesson where I'm going to talk about crazy things that people do. Another good title for this lesson would be Things Bob Doesn't Do. As I was putting the lesson together, I realized that almost all of the things on this list are things that I do not do. I am not a crazy person, but at the same time, I realize that many things on this list might be things that you do. So maybe saying that they're crazy isn't the nicest thing in the world. But we have a lesson here today where I'm going to look at a number of crazy things people do, things that people do because they like excitement and they like doing things that bring that excitement. So a few things before we talk about crazy things people do. Let's talk about a few ways we describe the people that do crazy things or exciting things. Maybe I'll just call them exciting things. Let's talk about a few ways we describe people who do that. The first way we might describe someone who does something really exciting is we might say they are a thrill seeker. When something is thrilling, it means it's exciting. And I realize that thrill is an extremely hard word for English learners to pronounce. Thrill. When you are a thrill seeker, you look for things to do that just are really, really exciting. So you are a thrill seeker. You are looking to do things that are thrilling. Another thing that people who like to do exciting things might do is something called extreme sports. We have sports, normal sports like soccer or hockey or football, but there is another category of sports called extreme sports. Extreme sports usually involve some of the activities that I will be talking about today. Extreme sports are sports where there might be a little bit of an element of danger to it. There's certainly a lot of excitement and a lot of thrill when you watch extreme sports. So again, we have the regular sports. We have the normal sports like baseball and soccer and football. Those are all considered normal sports. And then we have extreme sports. And I'm not going to name any yet because I'm going to talk about a few today. We might describe someone who likes doing exciting and crazy things as an adrenaline junkie. When you are scared or excited, your body releases adrenaline into your bloodstream, and it makes you, think faster, and you feel stronger, and your heart beats quicker. So there are people that really like the feeling they get from adrenaline, and so they do things that produce it, and we call them adrenaline junkies. So if you are an adrenaline junkie, it means you like doing exciting, crazy things that just make you feel really good and excited and happy to do it. We also have the phrase adrenaline rush. When you do something thrilling or exciting, you get an adrenaline rush, or we might just use the word rush. Someone might do a certain activity because they get a rush. Okay, it's just a really exciting thing to do, and they get an adrenaline rush or they get a rush when they do it. I just want to review these for a sec. So we have thrill seekers, thrill, hard to pronounce, but thrill seeker, they do extreme sports. They might be an adrenaline junkie. So you would describe a person as an adrenaline junkie. Oh, my cousin Joe, that guy, he's an adrenaline junkie. He just goes skydiving all the time. Or you might say that a person is really likes the adrenaline rush. They do it for the adrenaline rush, or they do it for the rush. But let's, I see a Brett from American English saying, just going to the grocery store during COVID gets my adrenaline pumping. Yeah, it certainly is a strange time in terms of how we feel. But let's talk about some of the activities that I consider crazy. Some of you might consider completely normal. And most of these activities are things that boring Bob the Canadian has not done. The first is bungee jumping. So bungee jumping is an activity where you go somewhere high and you attach a very stretchy cord or cable, which is called a bungee cord, to your body. And then you jump off. And then when you get to the bottom, you bounce until you stop bouncing. And then I think they lower you down or they pull you back up. I think they lower you down. But bungee jumping is usually done from a bridge or another structure that's really high in the air where it's safe to jump off of it. Some people bungee jump with the bungee cord attached to their body in the middle. Some jump with it attached to their feet, so they jump upside down. None of those are interesting to me. I am not someone who is going to try this anytime soon, if at all. I think it would terrify me. By the way, one of the reasons why I wouldn't do many of these things is because I'm afraid of heights. I'm not sure, I should do a lesson at some point on fears. One of my fears, one of the things I am afraid of is I do not like being high in the air. So bungee jumping is not interesting to me because I do not like heights. I am afraid of heights. There's another thing that involves heights, and it's called base jumping. This is something that very few people do, but base jumping involves jumping off very tall buildings or very tall towers with a parachute. So a base jumper would climb up to the top of a very, very tall building or tower, and then they would jump off, and then they would deploy their parachute. They would pull the cord, the parachute would come out, and then they would safely float to the ground. So again, not something I'm going to be doing anytime soon. The idea of being that high in the air is already terrifying for me, let alone jumping off the building with a parachute. So just the climb would be a challenge for me. The climb would be something that I would find terrifying. Yeah, that's the word I'm going to use. It would be terrifying for me to be at the top of a tall building. It would be even more terrifying to jump off that building. Not doing that anytime soon. The next thing is mountain climbing. So we have mountain climbing where you climb a mountain. We also have rock climbing or free climbing. There's a few different words to describe people who, the action of climbing up something like a mountain or a cliff. So many people will practice their rock climbing indoors. There's actually places in my local city where you can go rock climbing inside, where they have walls in the building that you can use to practice your climbing on. You can also go to an actual mountain. We don't have really big mountains close to me, but there are places in my area where you can go to do some rock climbing or free climbing. Usually mountain climbing involves ropes, and you have different kinds of mountain climbing equipment in order to climb up the side of a mountain. But mountain climbing is something I might do. Not a huge mountain, but that's more appealing to me than the other two that we've already looked at. Here's something that some of you might not consider crazy. I tried to pick a wide variety of things. One thing might be gambling. So where I live, there are casinos. If you go to Niagara Falls, Ontario, there are casinos. When you go to the casino, you can gamble. You can bet money and you can try to win money. In the world of gambling, there are things like slot machines. There are games of chance. There are card games. You can play games like poker, as well as 21. There are a number of different ways that you can risk your money to try and win more money. And I put this on the list of crazy things people do. I know some of you probably enjoy gambling. For me, it's a very mathematical equation. I know that the chance of me winning is very slim. The chance of the casino winning is very high. And so I just don't find gambling something that I would do. But some people like the thrill. They like the adrenaline rush they get when they bet large amounts of money to try and win some money. So gambling is definitely another thing that people do to get that adrenaline rush, or to, if they are a thrill seeker. High stakes gambling, I guess, where you bet lots of money, I'm sure would really be exciting for some people. Speeding. So I put this one on because I have a friend who really likes driving fast. He shouldn't do that. He should drive a little bit slower, but he enjoys driving over the speed limit. So if the speed limit is 80 kilometers an hour, he enjoys driving 120 kilometers an hour or 130 kilometers an hour. Some young people, when they first get their license, they enjoy driving over the speed limit, which is illegal. So obviously you can get pulled over by a police officer and you can get a ticket. But some people find speeding to be a rush. They enjoy speeding. I see Brent saying, thankfully, I've never liked gambling. I have a few friends who have a problem with it. Yeah, some people can like gambling a little too much, I think, sometimes, and it can be not a good thing. But speeding, if you're someone who gets a thrill from speeding, maybe you should become a race car driver. Maybe you should buy a race car and go drive at the track where it's safer for you to do that. So I put this one on because sometimes, just one sec. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I put stay up all night as something that crazy people do. This is something that I used to do when I was in my late teens and early 20s. So a long time ago, when I was a lot younger, I would sometimes stay up all night. Maybe I would stay up all night studying. Maybe I would stay up all night watching movies with friends. Maybe I would go to a party and stay really, really late. But now at my age, I consider this to be crazy. I consider it to be crazy to stay up all night. If I stay up all night, I pay the price for several days afterwards. If some of you watch my other channel, you know, I just taught the phrase pay the price. You don't always pay in money. If I stay up all night, I pay the price for several days afterwards. That means that I don't feel good for several days after if I stay up all night. The latest I stay up now is usually on New Year's Eve. On New Year's Eve, I stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning. Ooh, crazy. And even that makes me feel a little bit rough the next day. Let's see here. This is something I actually don't understand, but in North America, there are a lot of food eating competitions. There are competitions where people try to eat the most hot dogs, or where people try to eat the most pies. Around Thanksgiving time in the US, there usually are pie eating competitions, I would imagine. I like eating. So this is one that you maybe thought I would like, but I like eating, but I don't like eating a lot. But there are competitions where people go and they try to eat as many of one type of food as possible in order to win a prize. I consider that a crazy thing that people do. Certainly it is a little bit over the top. That's another way to describe it. Ziplining. I think if you watch my English lesson where I went to Niagara Falls, I think at a certain point you'll see people ziplining. Ziplining is when you attach yourself to a cable or rope, or we actually call it a zip line, but it's usually a metal cable, something really, really strong. And then it goes from a really high place down to a really low place, and you just kind of slide along. So you hook on to the zip line and you just kind of slide along. This is something I might be convinced to do someday. I don't consider this super crazy. It seems fairly safe. In terms of the things you can do high in the air, like skydiving or base jumping or bungee jumping, ziplining seems relatively safe. So someday, I think I will do some ziplining. I think I will, maybe I'll go to Niagara Falls one day and see if Jen and I can get the courage to go on the zip line in Niagara Falls. But ziplining, again, it's a long cable. I would say rope, but I think it's a cable. A cable is usually made out of metal. It's called a zip line, and you hook onto it, you slide down, and you are ziplining. I talked about this in one of my other lessons. There's something in colder climates called a polar bear swim. It happens on January 1st. So many people in Canada, well, not many, some people in Canada, the crazy people. So a small amount of people will go on New Year's Eve to a New Year's Eve party. They will go home and sleep, and then they'll get up early the next day. They'll go to a local lake or river that's frozen, and then they'll break a hole in the ice and they'll go for a swim in the freezing cold water. It's called a polar bear swim or a polar bear dip. They don't swim for very long. Usually people go in, they put their head under the water, and then they come out immediately. So it's not something that, it's not like they go for a swim for an hour. So a polar bear swim usually done on January 1st to kind of kick off the new year with style. Definitely, if you're looking for a thrill, especially if you are from a warmer country, come and do a polar bear swim. I might do this one as well. This would be something like ziplining and polar bear swims. Those would be interesting to me. I think I might do that one at some point in my life. If I do, I'll videotape it and show you guys. So if I zipline as well, I'll do that. I'll videotape it. So this is not an extreme sport. This is an actual sport, ski jumping. So when the Olympics are happening, I like watching ski jumping. I think ski jumpers are crazy. You have to be a little bit crazy to go down a ramp and to go flying through the air and then try to land without falling down when you land. Ski jumping to me is fascinating. I imagine there's a huge thrill when you do ski jumping. It must be a huge adrenaline rush when you're going down the slope. And then when you land and you land perfectly, you must just feel amazing. It must be a huge thrill when you go ski jumping. But yeah, ski jumping is something where I will never do. I like to watch it. But if the ramp was really little, I might do it. Like when I go skiing, normal skiing, I like going over little tiny jumps. But ski jumping, certainly something for adrenaline junkies or people who like thrills or like to have an adrenaline rush. This is something I would do. There are places in North America where we have rivers that have rapids. So when a river has rapids, it means the water turns white because it's going over a lot of rocks. And there is something called whitewater rafting. Whitewater rafting is when you go in a raft or a boat. They call it a raft, but it's really more of a boat. It's an inflatable boat. It's full of air. And then you go down the rapids in the boat. So it's called whitewater rafting. Some companies take their employees whitewater rafting as a team building exercise. I should ask my boss if we can do that. There are no rivers near us where you can go whitewater rafting. You actually have to go closer to the Rocky Mountains, close to in the province of Alberta, and in the Midwest in the United States. There's probably a lot more places where you can go whitewater rafting. Actually, I'm curious if Brent from American English with This Guy has ever been whitewater rafting. It's probably one of the more common things that people do for a thrill, is to go whitewater rafting. And it's probably a lot of fun because you're with people you know, and you see how they have paddles. I don't think the paddles do much. I think you try to keep the boat straight, but I'm not sure the paddle does a whole lot. So anyways, Brett, have you ever been whitewater rafting? Let us know in the chat if you have. So this is something that I actually have never done, but I have seen done, and I've participated in, but I've never been the person up top. When you go to a concert, sometimes people will jump off the stage onto the crowd, and the crowd will hold them up with their hands, and it's called crowd surfing. Sometimes when you're in the crowd, that people will lift you up and then you'll go on top of everyone's hands, and it's called crowd surfing. And you'll just kind of float around on top of the crowd. Usually happens at concerts. That's where it usually happens, where there's many, many people close to the stage listening to a rock band and just enjoying really good music and getting really crazy. And then eventually people might start crowd surfing. So Brent says, I've never been whitewater rafting, but I'd love to do it one day. Yeah, the kinds of things we can't do right now. It's kind of sad, but whitewater rafting obviously does not involve social distancing. So crowd surfing. I've never been the person on top, but I have been to a few concerts when I was younger where people were crowd surfing, and I was part of the crowd at least. So that was exciting for me. Hang gliding. So this is another one where you are really high in the air. It's when you start somewhere really high and you have a wing, and it's called a hang glider. And then you jump off the edge of a mountain or a cliff. And then you just kind of glide with the wind through the air until you eventually land comfortably and nicely on the ground. So hang gliding, another thing that people do. I think Some of these things are actually also a little bit expensive. So if you think about things like rock climbing or bungee jumping, they're things where you either need equipment or you have to pay to use equipment. So something like hang gliding, I would imagine, is also somewhat expensive. It's probably not cheap to go hang gliding. So there's something called parkour. It's also called free running, and they're slightly different, but both of them involve running and jumping off of parts of the city. So when you do parkour, you run along railings and you jump over like things like the stairs here, or you jump off the stairs and you try to run up walls a little bit, and then you do a spin or a somersault in the air. Parkour is something that became very popular a few years ago, but it's something where if you like running and jumping and doing flips and kind of bouncing off of things, parkour might be something exciting that you can do. Sometimes when I'm bored, I watch videos on YouTube of people doing parkour, where they are running through their city and they're just doing all kinds of really neat flips and somersaults and those kinds of things. Very cool, very interesting to watch. Tightrope walking. This is similar to base jumping. Sorry, it's not similar, but it's similar in the sense that not very many people do this. Okay, tightrope walking is something that the average person doesn't do, but there are some people who do this. In Niagara Falls, there was a man who wanted to try and walk across Niagara Falls on a tightrope. Sometimes they will put a tightrope between buildings and people will try to walk from one end to the other. The version of tightrope walking that some people do, I think, is called slacklining. I'll have to look that up. But slacklining, I think, is a little more common. Sorry, I just thought of that now. Slacklining. Yeah, so slacklining is where you get a line, which is called a slack line, and maybe you put it between two trees and it's really low to the ground, and then you try to walk along the line. So tightrope walking, definitely for the very, the people who really want a thrill would go tightrope walking. Again, not something I'm doing. Skydiving. Skydiving is probably one of the original things that people have done to get a thrill in the modern era. It's when you put on a parachute and you jump out of a plane and then you fall. You go through free fall. Free fall is the part of the jump where your parachute is closed, and then you pull a line to open your parachute. Sometimes when people jump out of a plane, their parachute actually opens immediately. There's a couple of different ways to go parachuting or skydiving. Skydiving is something that I think, like, I know a few people who have gone skydiving in their life. It's something that you can do if you are looking for a thrill. You can go skydiving. There's actually a place close to me where you can go and you can pay, and they will train you, and you can jump out of a plane and you can land safely on the ground with your parachute. So a number of words and phrases in there. We call it skydiving or parachuting. We usually call it skydiving. When you go skydiving, you wear a parachute. When you are falling and your parachute is closed, it's called free falling. You're free falling. Then when you open your parachute, you'll just kind of float nicely to the ground. Could I be convinced to skydive? Maybe. I don't know. Would I do it? You can skydive with another person where you are connected together, and it's a professional skydiver who goes with you and you have the same parachute. Maybe I'll do that. I'll ask Jen if she wants to go skydiving next year. This happens in Pamplona, Spain. I am not very familiar with this, but there's something called the running of the bulls, where on the streets they let bulls loose and the bulls run, and people run with them and try not to get run over. It's scary. I grew up on a farm. We had cows. We had large bulls. This is not safe. So as a child who grew up on a farm, I would say you should not run with the bulls. It is a dangerous thing to do. But maybe some of you have done this, and maybe it was a thrill. You certainly would have an adrenaline rush if you ran with the bulls, for sure. The triathlon. So we mentioned this earlier. Someone did the Ironman or the triathlon. So a triathlon is where you start by swimming When you get out of the water, your bike is waiting for you, and then you ride your bike for a bit, and then at the end you run. So this is for people who are very, very fit. You need to be in good shape in order to do a triathlon. It is a challenging, grueling, difficult thing to do. Grueling might be a new word for you, by the way. When something is grueling, it's just extremely hard. So definitely a triathlon would be grueling. Moshing. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but when you go to concerts, if it is a concert for a heavy metal band or a punk band or one of the more aggressive kinds of music, there might be a mosh pit at the right in front of the stage. A mosh pit is where people do what's called moshing, which is a very violent type of dancing, I guess you would say. It's where people aren't dancing to enjoy the beat. People are actually pushing each other around while they dance. It's very, very chaotic and it's very, very dangerous, I think. But some young people like going to listen to their favorite band. And if there might be a mosh pit, crowd surfing is a little more gentle than moshing for sure. Vic has become a member of the channel. Thank you, Vic, so much for joining the channel. That's awesome of you. Thank you for doing that. So this is the most extreme thing that I've ever done, and it's called a gaming marathon. So let me explain the word marathon. A marathon is a race that I believe is 26 miles long. You can watch the Olympics. I think it's the last event usually of the Olympics. It is an extremely long running race. But we use the word marathon for anything that we do for a long stretch of time. So you can go to a gaming marathon, which means that you go and maybe you play video games for the entire weekend. When I was younger, I went to many video game marathons where my friends and I would just play video games for hours on end. Okay, that's how you describe doing something for a very, very long time. Brent says, I was in a mosh pit in 1994 watching Metallica. So Metallica is a pretty hard rock band, metal band, I would say. Very interesting, Rod. Brent, what a crazy time you've lived in, Brent, to have seen Metallica live and to actually been in a mosh pit. Very cool. Let's see here. Cage diving. So I actually might do this someday. I know it's probably expensive. It looks relatively safe, doesn't it? The sharks can't get you if you're in a cage. I've always been fascinated by wild animals. And I wonder if I ever learned to scuba dive. When you scuba dive, you breathe underwater. You have a tank of air. I might be convinced to go in a cage and to go in the water to see sharks. I'm not going to do anything high in the air, but certainly things in the water would be a little easier for me to do. There's something called storm chasing, and a storm chaser is someone who chases a storm. This is something that's primarily done in the Midwest of the United States. There's an area in the Midwest, so in the middle of the United States, there's an area called Tornado Alley. There's a place where there are just lots of tornadoes. A tornado is also called a twister. It's like a funnel of air that comes out of the sky in a very, very bad storm. Storm chasing is something people do when they want to see a tornado. So there are people who chase storms in the United States, a little bit in Canada, but mostly I am most familiar with it in the United States. It's very dangerous because when you are chasing a storm that has tornadoes, those are very high destructive winds, very high speed winds and very destructive. So a storm chaser has to be an extremely, I was going to say crazy. They don't have to be, they're very scientific as well, the storm chasers. They are just very interested in studying the storms. So I might be convinced to be a storm chaser. I think I could do that. I like storms. I like watching them. But usually storm chasers have specialized vehicles with lots of sensors. And they chase their storms, chase storms. So here we go. There is a tower in Toronto called the CN Tower, and you can do what's called an edge walk. So if you look at the top here, the CN Tower is an extremely tall tower in the city of Toronto. And near the top, you can go outside and you can kind of hook yourself on with a cable and you can lean out when you're at the top. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law did this, and I thought they were crazy, but they said it was super exciting and super fun. So I don't know if this is something I would ever do, but it's certainly close. I live very close to the city of Toronto. Maybe someday I'll try it. I don't know. It's not something I'm eager to do, but I'm curious about it. We'll see. And then hot air balloon rides. This is probably something that most people think is fun and easy to do and not scary. But basically you go in the gondola. The bottom of a hot air balloon is called a gondola. And you go in it, and they use fire to heat up the air inside of a gigantic balloon. And you just peacefully float through the air. So you go for a hot air balloon ride. Some people do this close to special occasions in their life, maybe before they get married or something like that to celebrate. They'll go for a hot air balloon ride. A funny story. A funny story is a friend of mine who also has a farm, a hot air balloon landed in their field one time because somehow they had a little bit of a problem with the balloon. So Natalia alluded to saying, Bob, are you joking? I'm not sure which one you're talking about, Natalia, about the edge walk on the CN Tower. I don't know. I'm maybe of all of the things that you could do high in the air as a thrill-seeking activity, that might be the one thing that I might be willing to try. We'll see. I don't know. It does seem a little bit over the top in some ways, though.